Today we're going to take a look at parenthetical expressions. Parenthetical expressions basically come from the word parentheses, and oftentimes information which is not really necessary to the sentence is placed in parentheses. So we do the same thing with commas. So let's take a look at some parenthetical expressions we might come across. So the first one is a parenthetical prepositional phrase, a prep phrase which is kind of in the middle of the sentence, kind of breaking up the flow of the sentence. And oftentimes they're going to start with phrases like as well as, in addition to, and along with. When you put them next to the subject, it makes it sound like the subject's much bigger than it really is, but we don't count these. So if it says something like, most everyone, as well as English teachers, makes an occasional grammatical mistake. Nonetheless, it's still fun to judge others with eerie silence. Well, if you see the word everyone, everyone's singular. That's why we say most everyone makes a mistake. But when you add in as well as English teachers, it sounds like all of a sudden that subject turned plural, but it doesn't. We don't consider this to be part of the subject, so therefore we put commas on either side of it because it's parenthetical. And so therefore the commas separate it as well as it does not change the verb at all. Another use of parenthetical expressions would be using the word not and or. When you use not and or to create a contrasting phrase, we put commas on both sides of that phrase as a way of showing that it's not really affecting the verb at all. So if I said taco boat, not Krabby Patty, was served for lunch despite the advertised menu, well, not Krabby Patty is basically a contrast to taco boat, and I put commas on both sides of that. Sometimes people forget that second comma, but we need to have both. Same thing happens with the word or. When we use the word or, not to give two separate individual items, but to rename the original item, almost like creating a positive, we put commas on both sides. So if I said, Mr. Achille, or Johnny Calc, slipped through the crowd like mercury on an ignorant child's palm and arrived at the front of the line for turkey dinner day. Well, Johnny Calc and Mr. Achille are the same thing. So if I took the commas out, it sounds like there's two different people I could choose, Mr. Achille or Johnny Calc. But if they're the same thing, I am now creating a positive, but I want to make sure I put commas on both sides of the or phrase. Parenthetical modifiers in a positives. So a dash can also be used if you want to highlight something which is sort of explanatory. So if you really want to like sort of shout the information, put dashes instead of commas. So for example, foods on Mr. Marsh's diet, donuts, gummies, undercooked red meat, are supposedly naughty according to his doctor. So if I really want to highlight that list of donuts, gummies, and undercooked red meat, I'm going to put dashes on either side of that item. On the flip side, if I actually want to downplay it and almost make it a little bit more subtle, I'll use parentheses instead of commas. So I could say, foods on Mr. Marsh's diet, donuts, gummies, undercooked red meat, are supposedly naughty, according to his doctor. So the way you want your reader to read that sentence, whether they're shouting it, really hitting it harder, or kind of downplaying it, the punctuation will change. Next, parenthetical phrases in compound sentences. This is a tough one, so pay close attention to this one. So sometimes you have a parenthetical phrase that begins the sentence, and that's not a problem. So if I say something like, to be honest, I don't really care for your class, Mr. Marsh. Well, to be honest, starts the sentence. It's kind of parenthetical. It's also an infinitive. I'm going to put a comma after that word honest. Not a big deal at all. But what happens when this sentence actually becomes the second sentence in a compound pair? Imagine if I took the sentence and I pushed it later and I put something in front of it. So what if my real sentence was, advanced grammar was my sixth or seventh elective on my sheet. And to be honest, I don't really care for your class, Mr. Marsh. I want you to notice that there's no new comma in front of the word to be honest. Because basically, or essentially, you've created a brand new sentence. So as soon as I do comma and, which is my new sentence sitting right here, maybe I'll highlight it for you. As soon as I do comma and, it's a brand new sentence. And the punctuation rules kind of reset. Now, obviously, you don't capitalize the T in to, but the punctuation rules reset. So I don't put a comma in front of the T up here, so I don't put a comma in front of the T down here. Okay, so be careful of that. When you make a compound sentence, all of a sudden something starts off which is parenthetical, only put one comma in, but not both. Onto the back page of your worksheet, the last thing we'll take a look at today are parenthetical phrases or clauses in dependent clauses. That's kind of a mouthful. So sometimes a phrase or a clause actually interrupts the beginning of another clause. So if my example said, I wondered why I have to eat them if I don't like Brussels sprouts. Well, that's fine, because if I want you to see that you actually have two different clauses. You have a noun clause, why I have to eat them, I'll put him in yellow, if I don't like Brussels sprouts, which is an adverb clause. And so as long as they're separate, it's not a big deal. But if you look at my second example, what if I took if I don't like them and I actually inserted it inside that noun clause as an interrupter? Well, if I do that, I have to kind of put commas on either side of them. So I'd say, I wondered why, comma, if I don't like Brussels sprouts, comma, I have to eat them. I need to have both commas because I've interrupted the outside clause, which is why I have to eat them. And this is the rare time that you might have a comma near the word that, which very rarely happens, but it could if you have one of these weird structures. If I said, I thought that if I cut my mullet, girls would like me. I want you to see that the outside clause is that girls would like me. I kind of have it sitting right here, that girls would like me. And if I interrupt any of those words with if I cut my mullet, I've got to make sure I put commas on either side. And that's why there's a comma after that and a comma after mullet. Because what's happened is the original clause starts with the word that, just like the original clause up here started with the word why. And so if I interrupt that clause in any way, I've got to make sure I put commas on both sides. So as you take on these sentences down below, see where you can find where the comma needs to be added, maybe deleted, maybe moved, so that it actually is correct. That's all.